Hi and welcome to the series. In this series, I'm basically wanting to create the video series that I wish was available when I made the transition from Pro Tools over to Studio One full-time. So let's take a look at all the Pro Tools features from a Pro Tools perspective and talk about how Studio One handles it, the similarities and differences, and in some cases, maybe Studio One has something that Pro Tools didn't have at all, or vice versa. We're going to go through this one at a time, and my idea here is that hopefully this will be enough to get you off to a really solid start. So to start off with, I have a completely blank Pro Tools session, and I have a blank Studio One song. Now, how did I create this song? Very simple. File, new song. When we create a new song, we have the option to give it a song title. We have an option to give it a location. By default, Studio One creates a song folder that's within your documents. You can change this location. This is something we'll take a look at a little bit later on down the road if you want to. Or at any given point in time, you can choose a custom location just by choosing somewhere different for it to go. Now we have a lot of the stuff that we would expect. We can set a sample rate, we can set a resolution, our time base, our song length, BPM, time signature, key signature. This function right over here, or rather this preference, stretch audio files to song tempo. This is something I would advise leaving on because it can come in really handy, specifically when you're working with songs or maybe loops that are in different file formats where they have embedded tempo information. I think it's just a good thing to leave on by default. Can of course be turned on, and you can time stretch things manually after the fact if you want to. Okay, so we've created this new song. We have a blank canvas in both. Let's talk about a couple differences first. In Pro Tools, it's very much like when I was using it, it was this back and forth of using my shortcuts to toggle between the arrange window and the mixer. Because in Pro Tools, they are two separate windows completely. In Studio One, it's very much a single screen application. What do I mean by this? Okay, well, we can bring in an inspector, something like you see in Logic or Luna. We have our track list if we want. We can open up our editor. We can open up our mixer. We can open up our browser. We can have a lot of different windows and a lot of different information available visually to us as we're going. Let's close everything off here for a second. Let's talk about the console. In Studio One terminology, Pro Tools Mixer, Studio One Console. Let's open up the Mix tab, which automatically opens the console. Notice that this is a docked console and it's dynamically resizable. We can adjust things as needed. Also notice over here, we have this option to detach. Now, when we detach, this shows up as a separate window that can be resized. You could make this full screen, and then clicking F3, which is the show hide key command for the console in Studio One. This would be very similar to if we were working in Pro Tools and doing this type of thing. The only thing we would have to do is quite simply resize this or reposition this so that it occupied the full screen. Or you could leave it to occupy just a certain section of a screen, just like this. Okay, for now, I'm going to reattach this or redock this into the single screen. Now, we also have a browser. This browser functions, it's quite different than when compared to the Pro Tools browser. In the Pro Tools browser, we have a pool, which is similar to a Pro Tools clip list, but we have a shop here. We have a cloud tab. We have our files tab, which is basically the hierarchy, the disk hierarchy of our whole entire system. We have loops that can be tagged with metadata information. We have our effects tab, which shows all of our plugins. We have our instruments tab, which will show all of our different instruments. Then we have a home tab where we can get to any one of these. We're going to get into this a little bit later, but I'm just trying to give you a lay of the land for now. Now in Pro Tools, when we create tracks, I would go here. I would probably use the key commands. I would choose how many. I would choose the format. I would choose the actual track type. I could choose whether it's samples or tick bass. I could give things names. I could create multiple different tracks together. We could do all of this directly from within here. Now in Studio One, things are a little bit different. So we have an option over here. We have add tracks. Now, I guess before we get too far into things, I do want to mention that if we go to Studio One and keyboard shortcuts, this will be your absolute best friend because you can search for things and you can see what the assigned key command might be. Another thing worth pointing out is that we have the keyboard mapping scheme. There is a Pro Tools mode that you can load. And all of the things that you would kind of expect, like hopefully would work, like for example, using the T key and the R key to zoom in and zoom out, or maybe using the 4 and 7 on the numeric keypad for things like deactivating and activating your metronome and activating and deactivating your loop cycle modes. Those things are going to work, but I think what you'll find out pretty quickly is that if your expectation is that it's going to be one-to-one for everything Pro Tools offers, then you're probably going to be disappointed, because as much as they've done a great job, it isn't a one-to-one for everything, and that can sometimes be more frustrating. So regardless if you've bought a PreSonus interface and it came with Studio One Artist and you're just making an effort to learn this software, or you've purchased this, or you're trying out a demo, or maybe you're renting it somewhere, you're trying out a Sphere subscription, whatever the case is, I would advise that you try to start off with leaving this in the Studio One mode. And then if you want to look for something, so for example, let's say you say, well, how do I zoom in and zoom out? Okay, well, let's type in zoom in. What do we see? We see a category, zoom, and zoom in is E. Okay, zoom in is E. Okay, but what about zoom out? Well, let's just type in zoom out. Okay, zoom out is W. Okay, I'm starting to understand. So this is a way that you can do that. You can also just type in something in Google. What is the Pro Tools equivalent of tab to transient in Studio One? Most likely, you are going to have a video that shows up or a bit of text where you can find things out pretty early. Now, if you do happen to find a command that isn't enabled by default, maybe it's in the menu, but it doesn't have a key command, then this is also something that you can do here as well, keyboard shortcuts. So let's go to zoom. Okay, track height minimal. Maybe you want to set up something for track height minimal. There's no key command assigned. Well, I could assign something, try a key combination. It will tell you if it's already taken or not. And then it's just a matter of entering that, clicking assign, apply, and okay. All right. That being said, let's get started. How do we add tracks in Studio One? Well, we can use this plus icon, and then we have the option to choose between audio, instrument, automation, and folder. So know what you might be thinking, okay, well, where's my aux channel and where's my MIDI tracks? Okay, we're going to get into that in a bit. But let's say that we wanted to start with audio. So we could say I want some audio tracks. I want 4 audio tracks. The color, yeah, let's start with this color, or I could choose auto color. Format, I want it to be mono. A preset, do I need a preset on this? Not necessarily. Okay. What inputs? Okay, well, I want to start off with maybe this input over here, and I want them to be ascending. I want them all to come out of main outs, or it could be ascending. So what happens here in this case, it creates something for you here. We can open up the console. We can see that it cascaded the inputs. They're all assigned to main outs, those types of things. That's one way that you can do it. I actually don't do it that way, because what I've done is quite simply, if you right click in this area, notice there's a option within the menu that you can add an audio track mono, add an audio track stereo, add an instrument track, automation tracks. Like I said, we're going to get into that. So what I do is I just created a shortcut. So if I want mono tracks or if I want stereo tracks, and I can very easily create whatever I need very, very quickly. So that's the one thing. Now, also worth noting that when we talk about things like, for example, instruments in Studio One, that we have them all available through the browser here. And if I was to open up, let's open up a PreSonus instrument of some sort. Anything that we do here is drag and drop. I can drag an instance of Impact, which is kind of like a MPC style drum trigger pad over here. We have a software synthesizer. We've got MyTi. That's kind of just like a basic synthesizer. We have a sampler. This would be their version of something like what EXS24 would be in Logic. Just a very, very basic sampler that ships with a lot of different content that comes with Studio One. So when you drag and drop a lot of these things over to Studio One, it will just automatically create the appropriate track type that you need. All right. Now let's talk about a couple other things. I mentioned that we don't have aux channels. Well, actually, that's not completely true. Let's open up our console really quickly for a moment. I said that we don't have aux channels in Studio One, but we do have aux channels. But their purpose is slightly different when compared to Pro Tools. So for example, I can right click and I can add an aux channel. And this aux channel can basically accept any input that we have set up to our interface. So in my particular situation, I've got a lot of different gear that's set up here. So this is very much kind of like a real-time listening to something, but it's assigned in that way. But it is not assigned in the same context that we would use an aux channel in Pro Tools. So what do I mean by this? Okay, well, let's clear out everything. Click this track, scroll to the top, hold Shift. We'll right-click and we will remove selected tracks. And also, in this case, let's right-click, remove selected tracks and instruments. Let's start from a blank slate. I'm going to add let's say I added 5 tracks. Let's say that these were drum tracks. Also, I'm going to right click over here and let me remove this aux channel that we added. If I wanted to do something like an aux channel approach in Studio One, first thing I would do is probably give these all a common color. And then if we right click these tracks, we have the ability to add a bus for selected channels and add a VCA for selected channels. So add a bus for selected channels, automatically this becomes as if though we have routed all of these to an aux in Pro Tools. If I rename this, let's say I rename this drums, this automatically renames the output and the assignment stays the same. At the top here, I can click and I can see each one of these tracks that are assigned to this bus channel. Now, if I solo this bus, it solos everything else upstream. If I solo just this channel, it just solos this channel, and it obviously solos the bus so that this channel will play through. So whereas in Pro Tools, where you would have to think about what you solo safe in terms of your submixes, or whether you're using it for your entire mix or just a group of tracks on your aux, in Studio One, we don't have to think about this. And also, it happens automatically. Now, notice that this is an option that we have when we right click, but also notice that I've added a key command. This is something I do all the time. So for example, let's add some more channels over here, and I want to give these a different color. Maybe let's make them something like this color. If these were a different set of tracks, maybe these were percussion tracks, okay? I could just quite simply highlight this one. Actually, let's give it a different color. Let's go with purple. And then because this is selected, I would just use my key command. And now I've added a bus channel. And I could also name this percussion. Oops, never try to type in a live video when there's a microphone right in front of your face. And this automatically renames the output to percussion. Okay. Another thing worth mentioning in Studio One is that if you have multiple channels that are selected, okay, so I guess let's talk about that as well. If you're talking about the arrange window, it's a track. Up here is a track. When we talk about the terminology of selecting them from within the console, it's a channel. Why are tracks and channels not the exact same? This is one of the differences between Pro Tools and Studio One, is that in Pro Tools, your track is your track in your arrange window, and your track is your track if you select it in the mixer. But within Studio One terminology, a track is over here, and then the corresponding channel to that track would be like over here. So think of this in this way. Let's say that you have one track that you're sequencing all of your drums on, but then maybe your drum machine had multiple outputs and multiple channels. So you could have one track that you sequence on in the arrange window, but it feeds into the console with multiple channels. That's the easiest way I can think to describe that. Something else that we have, like I said over here, we have selection-based groups. Anything that we've selected, all of these will move together. Anything that we've selected, if I mute or if I solo or if I record arm or if I monitor enable, anything that happens in this regard will happen to all of the channels that we have selected in the console. Now, if we wanted to temporarily remove ourselves from the grid, we can hold down the Alt or Option modifier, and I can keep these selected, and I can make relative offsets between these, and then they're still selected so that I can treat them like this. For this particular reason, you will probably find that whereas in Pro Tools, you had to do a lot of grouping setup before you got going, in Studio One, honestly, I do use groups, and when I first started using Studio One, I was pretty disappointed in the lack of group options. They have since been modified, and you have pretty much all the same options that you do within Pro Tools. But at this point, I don't use groups that much, even though I never thought I would say that. Now, another thing worth pointing out is, for example, for something like a VCA fader. In Pro Tools, you have to have a group that's set up, and then once that group is set up, you create a VCA fader, you bring it in, shows up in the mixer, you then need to assign it to a group. In Studio One, that's not the way that this works. Any option, any amount of channels that you have selected, if I wanted to create 2 VCAs, let's say, first of all, let me close my browser so we'll get a little bit more screen real estate. And let's also close this channel list so we expand things out. I have a drums bus and I have a percussion bus, which in Pro Tools terminology would be like having a drums aux and a percussion aux. If I wanted to assign a VCA master for each one of these, even though they're not in any groups, then it'd be very easy for me to do that. For example, I could click these tracks over here, right click, and notice I have the option to add VCA for selected channels. Now I could call this drums. I could reposition this if I didn't want it. I could move this over here. You can see in the bottom that this is now linked to a VCA. These are blank over here. So I don't think I need to explain the difference between VCAs. We can automate a VCA and still be able to have individual control over all these channels. Also, we can control the volume as it's being pushed into the actual bus, which would be like the Pro Tools drum aux. Same thing over here. The same thing over here. I'm going to use a shortcut this time. And now I'm just going to call this, for example, perk. Now, in terms of how this affects your workflow, well, it depends. However you like to work. If you wanted to work in a very, very specific way for maybe, for example, you just wanted to be viewing VCA channels. So for example, I'll hide all my audio channels. I'll hide my bus channels. And now I have two VCA faders, which are in control of everything that's pushing into my auxes, right? If I wanted to have that view, I could choose to show my buses as well, or I could choose to show my audio tracks. Now, temporarily, I'm going to remove these VCAs. Just going to right click and let's choose the option to remove these. Now you can see the routing has disappeared. I want to talk about something else. Let's talk about folder tracks in Pro Tools. So we have two types of folder tracks. We have one that is specifically for organizational purposes, where you want to have stuff within a folder just to keep it organized and to be able to give yourself a little bit more of a clean real estate in your arrange window. And then we have a folder track that includes summing. So it's actually the signal routing is going through that, and that can be linked to a aux channel. So in Studio One, it is very, very similar. There's a couple different ways that we can do it. I would say the easiest part would be if you already have your routing in place, like we do here. We have our drum tracks that are routed to our drum bus, and we have our percussion tracks that have all been routed to our percussion bus. If I take these tracks and right click, I can pack these into a folder. Now notice over here, this just says track 14. If I open and close this, it will obviously clutter or declutter my arrange window and my console. If I wanted to link this folder to a bus channel, it's very, very easy for me to be able to do this. So for example, I could select this option over here, and then I could choose to simply assign this to one of the ones that's already pre-existing. So now I have this drums channel. I've just assigned it to this folder. Now I can open and close this. I can collapse and expand this, and notice that both my arrange window and my console will update with that view. Now, another way that I could do this is I could actually, let's temporarily remove this so we can see that a different way. So I can select all these, and then I could pack these into a folder. And then with this folder over here, as long as the height is pulled down enough, I could actually choose to add a bus channel directly from within the folder. So we've created the folder. Actually, let's rename this before we do that. Let's just call it perk. Now this little drop-down menu, I could say, you know what, I want a bus channel for this. So I could say add bus channel. Now I have a bus channel, it's taken on a color, and I can open and close this, and it has that routing. I'm actually going to undo this. Let's take a look at one more thing. Another thing that you can do with folders in Studio One that you can't do with folders in Pro Tools is, let's say that I wanted to add the routing. I wanted to link the folder to the VCA channel instead of the aux. Well, that's something we can do as well. I could add a VCA channel. So now I actually have a VCA channel that is linked to the folder. What do I mean by this? Okay, well, in this channel over here, if I move this up or down, I'm adjusting the level of this. And this, of course, will adjust the level of these tracks underneath. But notice that these are routed to the main outs. So this could be routed anywhere downstream and it wouldn't matter. So you have the choice of whether you want to use VCA channels or aux channels in Studio One terminology, bus channels. I think we've covered a lot here. That's really a lot. But I think this should give a good understanding. We have very, very basic things like editing tools. A lot of this stuff is self-explanatory. We have, for example, our tempo information. We have these global track visibility. We can choose to show things like markers. We can choose to show an alternate ruler, which could be set to something like, for example, frames. Let's take this off. Also, if you wanted to if you pull this out a little bit more, you can actually see these different options. We have a secondary ruler, we have our arranger. We have an arranger track, which is something we're going to get into. We have a chord track, we'll get into that later. Time signature track, this is for basic things, time signature. If I wanted to change this, if I wanted to add, insert a time signature, then that's something I could do. Maybe I wanted to have 1 bar of 2/4. I could insert that here, and then maybe over here, let's zoom in a little bit. Maybe at 46, I want to go back to 4/4. We'll insert this. We'll go back to 4/4. Also, with respect to signatures, we could also insert a key signature. So maybe to start off with, this song would be in C. So we go very beginning, it's in C, and then maybe it modulates over here at bar 50. We'll insert a different key signature. Maybe here it modulates to G, right? So now if we move here, notice this says C, and if I move here, that this says G. So in terms of kind of organizational stuff. And then of course we have our tempo track. This works a little bit different than Pro Tools with respect to the way that you can do things like this, for example, where you could create 2 points and then you could have a slow gradual curve instead of steps and things like that. I think that's where we'll leave off for now. In the next video, we're going to talk about setting up your audio I/O setup for your specific interface. So we'll catch you for more in that next video.